In this edition of Show and Tell, I wanted to show you one of my favorite pieces of my Game Boy collection, my Game Boy Light. So while you consider hitting the subscribe button, let's take a look. Is that out of focus?
Geek Therapy Radio.
The Game Boy Light was available only in Japan when it was first released in April 1998, only about 6 months before the Game Boy Color. I always found that the narrow window of release between the Light and the Color a little odd. I realized that the green electroluminescent technology of the Game Boy Light wouldn't have worked in the Game Boy Color, but it always seemed to me like they could have skipped the Game Boy Light and just released the Game Boy Color with a more suitable form of front light, like the Sega Game Gear. I don't know. It was just funny to me that they added a light to the old grayscale Game Boy, but left the newfangled color Game Boy literally in the dark. Seems like you'd want the newest color console to have the light if given the choice between the two. Not that it would matter anyway to anyone outside of Japan. We never got the Game Boy Light. Anyways, we could argue and discuss the quid pro quo of available screen lighting technology of the era until we're blue in the face. For one thing, the Game Boy Color screen could not be backlit in the first place. But I'll digress and let's move on. Through the magic of eBay, you can purchase a Game Boy Light of various condition and have it shipped almost anywhere in the world, usually under or around $100 US. That's about how much I paid for mine a few years ago. I was at least 30 years old, but I waited for the package like it was Christmas morning. I was very excited. Actually getting one for my own made me feel like a kid again. I'm a geek. What can I say? Now, I mentioned earlier that the Game Boy Light is rare, but that may simply depend on whether or not you lived in Japan, as I've seen production estimates vary between 12,000 units and a million. So I don't know what really to believe. I'm hoping somebody watching can shed some light on actual production numbers in the comments below. I'm sorry. However, normal Game Boys can be had for less than half the cost of a Game Boy Light. So to me, it's not inconceivable that actual production numbers were lower, especially since the Light was never intended for sale outside of Japan. I'll put it this way. Nintendo tried to sell as many Game Boys globally as possible to between 6 and 7 billion people, but only tried to sell the Game Boy Light within its own borders to about 126 million people as of 1998. Further evidence production would be quite low compared to mainstream models. But enough about that for now. Essentially, the Game Boy Light is nearly identical to the Game Boy Pocket except in some obvious areas. First and most obviously, it has the electroluminescent backlighting, just like the Indiglow we saw in many digital watches. This meant no more trying to find the perfect lighting to see what we were playing or messing around with those worm lights. I liked the worm light, but this is so much better. The display itself was not an improvement over the Game Boy Pocket besides having a backlight. It was no more sharp, no more crisp than the Game Boy Pocket. That said, the display of the Pocket and the Light were a miracle over the original Game Boy. The next most noticeable difference between the Pocket and the Light is the battery compartment. The Game Boy Light takes 2 AA batteries, where the Pocket takes AAA batteries. And as such, the battery cover bulges with 2 horizontal battery butt cheeks, similar to the Game Boy Color, that, like mentioned above, came 6 months after the Light. Some were disappointed by the bulge, but besides the actual backlight, this is actually my favorite feature of the Game Boy Light, and the reason I usually use the Light instead of my Pocket. Battery life. Whereas the Pocket could achieve about 8 to 10 hours, the Light could achieve nearly double that with the backlight off at around 20 hours. With the backlight on, this dropped to around 10 or 11 hours. Super honesty time. The AA batteries in the Game Boy Light also handle the increased power draw of my EverDrive GB much better than the Game Boy Pocket's AAA batteries. Loading a ROM off the SD card into memory puts quite a large surge load on the batteries, much like starting a car. The higher capacity inherent to AA over AAA batteries means the Game Boy Light is ideal in this scenario. The next difference is perhaps the least noticeable unless placed side by side. The size of the light is nearly identical to the Game Boy Color. And trust me, this is a non-issue. It's just something fascinating. The last difference is the power switch. It is neat to see a Game Boy with 3 modes instead of just 2. On the Game Boy Light, you have off, on, and of course, light. So that's about it for this episode of Show and Tell. I hope you enjoyed exploring my Game Boy Light. As always, with every sign-off, I'll remind you that you are worthy of love. We're all geeks about something, so embrace your inner geek. Be good to yourselves and others, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.